I didn't hear the first one, or the fifth, or even the 20th. I was asleep, the kind of deep, heavy sleep you only get when you've finally convinced yourself you're safe. For 7 years, my phone had been a tool, not a weapon. It was for work emails, grocery lists, and the 3 friends who actually knew the person I had become, not the shadow I used to be. But then, at 3:14 a.m., the silence of my apartment didn't just break. It shattered. The vibration on the nightstand sounded like a jackhammer against my skull. I reached out, eyes bleary, thinking it was a fluke. An accidental dial. A telemarketer from a different time zone. I silenced it. 2 seconds later, the screen lit up again. Unknown number. I declined it. It rang again. And again. It was like a physical assault through a digital signal. My heart started that old, familiar rhythm. The frantic, uneven thud against my ribs that I hadn't felt since I walked out of that house in Oregon with nothing but a backpack and a cracked windshield. I sat up, the cold air hitting my sweat-slick skin. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I opened my notifications. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. 99 new voicemails. 99. In less than an hour. The air left my lungs. That's not a check-in. That's not a, hey, we miss you. That is a haunting. My mind raced through the faces I'd spent nearly a decade trying to blur. Elias, my brother, with his sharp tongue and sharper temper. My mother, Clara, whose love was always a transaction I couldn't afford. And my father, the man who taught me that silence was the only way to survive. I stared at the list of voicemails. They were all from different numbers, different area codes, but I knew the source. It was a swarm. A coordinated strike. I felt the walls of my beautiful, quiet life beginning to sweat. I'd spent 7 years building a fortress of no contact. I changed my name, my city, my hair, my soul. I thought I was a ghost to them. But ghosts don't get 99 voicemails. I tapped the first one. My hand was shaking so badly, I hit the speakerphone by accident. Leo? Leo, I know you're there. You think you can just stay dead? You think the world stopped because you ran away? Pick up the phone, you coward. Pick up before we make you pick up. It was Elias. His voice hadn't aged a day. It still sounded like gravel in a blender. But there was something else in his tone. Not just anger. Desperation. A frantic, cornered animal kind of energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. Why now? Why at night? I looked at the window. The streetlights outside were flickering. I felt like I was being watched through the glass, even though I was 4 stories up. I scrolled down to the 99th message. The timestamp was 1 minute ago. The phone rang in my hand again. The 100th call. The screen didn't say unknown this time. It showed a photo. A photo of me. Not a recent one. A photo of me when I was 12 years old, sitting on the porch of the old house, looking terrified. How did they have this? How were they calling from inside my memories? I hit accept. My voice was a ghost of itself. Hello. There was no breathing on the other end. Just the sound of a heavy door creaking open, and then a voice I hadn't heard since the day I died to them. A voice that whispered my real name. The name I buried. Found you, Julian. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark. The silence, now heavier than the ringing had been. Julian. That name felt like a suit of lead. To the world, I was Leo Vance, a freelance graphic designer in Chicago. I liked black coffee, indie bookstores, and my privacy. But Julian was the boy who hid under the sink when the shouting got too loud. Julian was the boy who took the blame for the broken vase, the missed mortgage payment, the shattered lives of 2 people who should have never been parents. I looked at my phone. It felt hot, like it was melting. 99 voicemails. I realized then that I wasn't just being contacted. I was being reclaimed. I forced myself to listen to the second message. It was my mother, Clara. Her voice was high, melodic, and terrifyingly sweet. Julian, honey? It's Mom. We're all so worried. There's been a development. Your father isn't himself. He keeps calling for you. He says you have something that belongs to him. Something you took when you left. Just come home, okay? We can forget the last 7 years. We can be a family again. I felt a surge of nausea. Something I took? I left with a change of clothes and $100 I'd saved from working under the table at a car wash. I didn't take anything but my own life. But that was her specialty, the gilded lie. She'd frame my escape as a theft. She'd make my survival look like a crime. I started scrolling through the messages, skipping through the bile. Message 15. Elias screaming. Message 22. My Aunt Sarah, crying, telling me I was killing my father by staying away. Message 48. A voice I didn't recognize, deep and clinical, telling me that legal proceedings would begin if I didn't respond by dawn.
Dawn.
I looked at the clock. 4 a.m. What could they possibly want after 7 years of total silence? I'd blocked their numbers, their emails, their social media. I'd moved 3 times. I'd been a shadow. To find me like this, to blast through my defenses with 99 messages in a single hour, required more than just a lucky Google search. It required a private investigator, or someone on the inside of my life. I looked around my apartment. Suddenly, my books, my plants, my expensive espresso machine, everything looked like a stage prop. Was I even safe here? I played message 66. This one was different. There was no talking, just the sound of a metronome.
Tick, tick, tick.
And then, a muffled sound in the background. It sounded like a hospital monitor. Beep, beep,
Beep.
My father, Silas Thorne. The man was a mountain of a human, a patriarch who ruled through intimidation and a cold, calculating intellect. He didn't get sick. He didn't call for people. He commanded them. If he was in a hospital, and if they were this desperate to find me, it wasn't out of love. It was out of a need. I remember the last thing he said to me. I was 19. I was standing in the driveway, my old sedan idling.
He didn't yell.
He just stood on the porch, his shadow stretching over me. He said, "You'll come back, Julian."
Not because you want to.
But because you're a thorn. And a thorn always pays the debt. I had spent 7 years convincing myself I didn't owe him a dime. Not a drop of blood, not a second of my time. But as I reached message 80, my heart stopped. It wasn't my family this time. It was a woman's voice.
Soft.
Trembling. Julian? It's Maya. Please, if you can hear this, don't come. They're using me to get to you. They found out where I am. Run, Julian. Run as far as. The message cut off with a sharp, metallic bang. Maya. My sister. The only person I regretted leaving behind. The only person I thought was safe because she'd stayed obedient. They had her. And then, my front door buzzer rang. The buzzer didn't just ring. It screamed through the apartment. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, that old, cold instinct taking over. Don't move. Don't make a sound. If they can't see you, you aren't there. But I wasn't that 19-year-old kid in the hallway anymore. I was a man with a life, a lease, and a front door with a heavy deadbolt. I crept toward the intercom. My hand hovered over the button. Part of me wanted to rip the unit off the wall. Another part, the part that had been conditioned for 2 decades to obey, wanted to press it and apologize for making them wait. Who is it? I whispered, though I already knew. Delivery for Vance. A voice crackled back. It wasn't Elias. It was a courier. Professional.
Bored.
I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I opened the door just a crack, the security chain still engaged. A young guy in a windbreaker handed me a thick, manila envelope. No signature required. He was gone before I could ask who sent it. I sat on the floor of my entryway, the envelope heavy in my lap. My name, Leo Vance, was typed on the front. But inside? Inside was a stack of Polaroids. They weren't old photos. They were shots of me. From yesterday. Me at the coffee shop. Me walking into my office building. Me standing at my balcony at sunset, looking out at the city I thought was my sanctuary. They had been watching me for weeks. This wasn't a sudden explosion of 99 voicemails. This was the climax of a long, silent hunt. Attached to the photos was a single yellow sticky note. 2 words in my mother's elegant, loopy handwriting. Time's up. I felt a wave of cold fury. They weren't just asking me to come back, they were showing me that my walls didn't exist. The no contact I had spent 7 years perfecting was a paper shield, and they had just set it on fire. I went back to the phone. I had to know what the lever was.
Why now?
I scrolled to message number 33. This one was from Elias again, but his voice was different. He wasn't screaming. He was crying. Julian, please. Dad, he did something. He made a deal he couldn't keep, and now the people he owes are looking at the rest of us.
They found the offshore accounts.
They found the discrepancies in the firm's books. They're going to take everything, Julian. The house, the name, unless you use the key. The one he gave you the night you left. I stared at the phone. The key? I didn't have a key. I left with a backpack and a sense of desperation, so thick I could taste it. I searched my memory, digging through the wreckage of that final night. The shouting. The sound of glass breaking. My father grabbing my arm, his fingers digging into my muscle like talons.
Wait.
The watch. On my 19th birthday, Silas had handed me a heavy, silver heirloom watch. A Thorn always knows what time it is, he'd said with that twisted smirk. I'd hated it. It felt like a handcuff. When I ran, I tossed it into the bottom of my bag, intending to pawn it for gas money. But I never did. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It had stayed at the bottom of a cardboard box, moved from apartment to apartment, a piece of lead I couldn't quite throw away. I ran to my closet, pulling down a dusty box labeled miscellaneous. I tore through old tax returns and college notebooks until my fingers hit cold metal. I pulled out the watch. It was stopped at 3:14, the same time the voicemail started. I held the watch under my desk lamp. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, antique, intricate, and utterly suffocating. I tried to wind it, but the crown wouldn't budge. It wasn't just stopped, it was locked. I remembered Silas's voice in message 88. The dead is in the timing, Julian. Always in the timing. He was a man of riddles and power plays. He never gave a gift that didn't have a hook in it. I grabbed a small screwdriver set I used for my computer builds and started prying at the back casing. My heart was hammering against my teeth. When the plate popped off, I didn't see gears. I didn't see a heartbeat of brass and springs. I saw a tiny, high-density microSD card tucked into a custom-milled slot where the movement should have been. My father hadn't given me a watch. He'd given me a dead man's switch. I slotted the card into my laptop. My hands were shaking so hard I missed the port twice. When the drive finally mounted, a single folder appeared. For the prodigal. I opened it. It wasn't family photos. It was spreadsheets. Thousands of them. Wire transfers. Names of politicians I recognized from the news. Shell companies with names like Winterleaf Holdings and ST Foundations. This was the Thorn Empire skeleton. The real one. The one made of blackmail and laundered blood. He hadn't kept me around because I was his son. He'd turned me into a safety deposit box. He knew that if I ever ran, I'd take the watch. And he knew that if the feds ever came knocking on his door, he could tell his enemies that the evidence was with a boy who didn't even know he had it. I was his leverage. I was his shield. Suddenly, the 99 voicemails made a sickening kind of sense. The development wasn't a health scare. It was a collapse. The walls were closing in on Silas Thorn, and I was holding the only thing that could buy his way out, or sink him forever. Then, message 90 played. It was a recording of a struggle. I heard Maya's voice. She was arguing with someone. He's not coming back for a watch, Elias. He's gone. Let him be gone. And then the sound of a slap. A heavy, wet thud that made me see red. He'll come. Elias's voice came through, cold and sharp. Because if he doesn't, you're the one who pays the interest on Dad's debt. And believe me, Maya, these people don't take checks. I slammed my fist onto the desk. The pain flared up my arm, but it was nothing compared to the guilt. I thought I had saved myself. I thought I'd escaped the poison. But by leaving, I'd left Maya in the splash zone. I'd let her become the collateral for a secret I didn't even know I was carrying. The phone rang again. Number 101. I didn't hesitate. I picked up. I have the card, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a stranger. There was a long pause. Then, my father's voice, not the wheeze I'd hear later, but the old Silas. The lion. I knew you were smart enough to look, Julian. Most people just want to know the time. But you always wanted to know how things worked. Let Maya go, I said. I'll bring you the card. I'll bring you everything. Oh, you'll bring more than that, Silas whispered. You're coming home to take your place. The empire is crumbling, and it needs a foundation. You're the only one left with a clean enough name to front the new accounts. You're going to save us, Julian, whether you want to or not. I was on the I-90 by 5 a.m. The Chicago skyline was a series of jagged teeth in my rearview mirror. Every mile I drove toward the Pacific Northwest felt like I was unraveling 7 years of therapy, 7 years of growth, 7 years of breathing. The drive was a blur of caffeine and ghosts. Every time I closed my eyes at a rest stop, I saw the house. The Thorne Estate. To the neighbors, it was a landmark.
To me, it was a panopticon.
A place where every floorboard creaked a warning and every dinner was an interrogation. I had the micro SD card taped to the inside of my thigh. I had a burner phone in the cup holder. And I had a tire iron under the driver's seat. I kept playing the messages. I was addicted to the pain of them now. I needed to remember exactly who these people were before I stepped back into their lair. Message 55, my mother. Julian, your father is so hurt that you'd think so poorly of us. We only did what we did to protect you. The world is a cruel place, honey. We're the only ones who truly love you. The gilded lie again. She was the one who groomed the cage, making the bars look like ornaments. She'd spend years telling me the outside world would chew me up, that I was too sensitive, too broken to survive without the Thorne name. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were strong. They were the hands of a man who had built a career from scratch, who had navigated a city alone, who had survived. I wasn't broken. I was tempered. As I crossed the state line into Oregon, the weather turned. The sky went from a bruised purple to a heavy, weeping gray. The pines began to crowd the highway, their needles like dark lace against the mist. It looked exactly like the day I left. I pulled into a diner 20 miles outside of my hometown. I needed to think. I needed a plan that didn't involve me walking into a trap. I sat in a back booth, the smell of burnt coffee and grease grounding me. I opened my laptop one last time. I didn't just look at the spreadsheets. I looked at the metadata. I looked at the dates the files were last accessed. My heart skipped. The files hadn't been touched in 3 years. Not until last week. If Silas was in trouble with the feds or dangerous people, he would have been all over these files months ago. Why wait? Why the sudden 99 voicemail explosion? I looked closer at a folder buried in a subdirectory titled Plantation. Inside were medical records. Not for Silas. For me. Blood tests from when I was a teenager. Genetic screenings. Compatibility charts. And then I saw the most recent file, dated 2 weeks ago. It was a hospital report from the Portland General ICU. Silas Thorne. Diagnosis: acute renal failure. Priority 1 for transplant. I felt the blood drain from my face. The debt wasn't the data. The debt wasn't the money. The data was the bait. Maya was the hook, but I was the harvest. I closed the laptop slowly. My reflection in the dark screen looked like a ghost. They didn't want their son back. They didn't even want their safety deposit box back. They wanted my body. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum like a scream. I didn't go back to the car. I walked to the payphone in the back of the diner, the kind of ancient relic that doesn't track GPS. I dialed a number I hadn't called in half a decade. A man I'd met in my first year in Chicago, someone who dealt in difficult problems. "It's Julian," I said when he picked up. "I'm in Oregon. I need a clean extraction and a scorched earth policy. How fast can you get a team to the Thorne Estate?" "Julian," the voice crackled. "I thought you were dead." "I was," I said, looking out at the rain. "But I'm about to become everyone's worst nightmare." I sat in my car in the diner parking lot, watching the wipers bat away the deluge. The revelation in those medical files didn't just hurt, it clarified everything. It turned the 99 voicemails from a frantic plea into a shopping list. Silas Thorne didn't see a son when he looked at me. He saw a biological insurance policy with a pulse. My father was a man who believed the world was a vending machine. If you put in enough power, it had to give you what you wanted. And right now, he wanted 10 more years of life, and he expected me to provide the parts. I played message number 72. It was my mother again. Her voice was a soft, rhythmic hum. "Julian, darling, the doctors say time is of the essence. We've already cleared a wing at the private clinic in Portland. It's very discreet, very comfortable. You always liked soft sheets, remember? We've made sure everything is ready for your arrival." The soft sheets. She was talking about a recovery room for a surgery I hadn't agreed to. She was decorating my cage while they sharpened the scalpels. I looked at the burner phone. I had 3 hours before the extraction team I'd called, a group of private security contractors I'd met during a high-stakes corporate design gig, would be in position. But I couldn't just wait. Every minute I sat here, Maya was in that house with Elias. And Elias was the kind of person who broke things just to see if they'd make a sound. I put the car in gear and drove toward the estate. I didn't take the main road. I took the old logging trails I used to hike when I was a kid, the ones that skirted the edge of the Thorne property. The woods were thick with fog, the cedar trees standing like silent sentinels. I parked a mile out and walked the rest of the way, the mud sucking at my boots. As I reached the perimeter fence, I saw the house. It sat on the hill like a bloated gray spider. Lights were on in the library and the master bedroom. I saw a shadow move past the window, tall, broad-shouldered. Elias. He was pacing. I checked my phone. Message 92. A text this time. A photo of Maya's hand. She was wearing the gold bracelet I'd given her for her 16th birthday, the only thing of value she owned. The clasp was broken. "She's getting impatient, Julian. Don't make us keep her entertained." I felt a surge of cold, murderous adrenaline. I wasn't just here to negotiate anymore. I was here to dismantle. I reached the cellar doors, the ones that led into the old coal room. I knew the keypad code. Silas was arrogant. He never changed things because he assumed no one would ever dare use his own tools against him. 4-3-1-4. The time the watch stopped. The time the voicemail started. The lock clicked. I slipped into the dark, the smell of damp earth and old wine rising to meet me. I was inside the beast. Now, I just had to find the heart. The house was too quiet. In a normal home, silence is peace. In the Thorne estate, silence is a predator holding its breath. I moved through the basement, my footsteps light on the concrete. I reached the service stairs and pressed my ear to the wood. Above me, I heard the muffled clink of a glass. And then a cough. A wet, racking sound that echoed through the vents. Silas. He was in the study, likely hooked up to the machines that were barely keeping him tethered to this world. I reached the first floor and slipped into the shadows of the velvet curtains in the dining hall. The air tasted of ozone and expensive floor wax. "Is he here yet?" The voice came from the hallway. It was Clara. She sounded exhausted, the gilded lie finally wearing thin at the edges. "He's close," Elias replied. I could hear the leather of his shoes clicking on the hardwood. The GPS on the courier's van tracked him to the county line 2 hours ago. "He's circling. He's scared." "He should be," Clara whispered. "Silas is losing his mind." Elias. "He told the surgeon to start the prep. He thinks Julian is just going to walk through the front door and lie down on the table." "He will," Elias said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Because he's a coward. He ran once, and he's been running ever since. Cowards always come home when they realize there's nowhere left to hide." I gripped the tire iron in my jacket pocket. My knuckles were white. I wanted to step out and show him exactly how much I'd stopped running. But I had to find Maya first. I waited until their footsteps faded toward the kitchen. I moved like a ghost up the grand staircase. My old room was at the end of the hall, but the door was wide open, the furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts. They hadn't kept it for me. They'd turned it into a storage unit for my disappearance. I headed for the attic stairs. That's where they'd put her. It was the only room with a lock on the outside. As I reached the top landing, I saw the heavy brass bolt. I slid it back as quietly as I could. The door creaked. Inside, the room was freezing. Maya was huddled in the corner, wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood up, her face pale and bruised, and looked at me with a look of such profound relief that it nearly broke me. "Julian," she breathed. "Don't talk," I whispered, pulling her into a hug. She was shaking. "We're getting out."
Now.
"You can't," she gasped, gripping my coat. "Julian, it's not just Elias. There are men outside. Men in suits. Silas hired security from the city. They're waiting for you to hit the front porch." I looked at the window. Down in the driveway, I saw the glow of a cigarette. Then another. They hadn't just called me. They'd built a net. The 99 voicemails weren't just a lure. They were a distraction while the hunters took their positions. "I know about the clinic, Maya," I said, my voice low and hard. "I know about the transplant." She looked at the floor. "He told me yesterday. He said it was your duty. That the Thorne legacy depended on it. He's dying, Julian. And he's decided that if he goes, he's taking the best parts of you with him." "Not today," I said. I led her back down the attic stairs. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. The extraction team was still an hour out, and the net was closing. If I wanted to get Maya out, I had to go through the center of the web. We reached the second-floor landing when the lights flickered and died. For a second, the house was plunged into total darkness. Then, the emergency generators kicked in with a low, rhythmic thrum. Thump-thump, thump-thump, like a giant heartbeat. "Julian." The voice came from the bottom of the stairs. It was Silas. He was standing in the foyer, illuminated by the dim emergency lights. He was in a wheelchair, a tangle of clear tubes snaking from his nose to an oxygen tank. Beside him stood Elias, looking smug, and Clara, looking like she was about to faint. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, son," Silas wheezed. The mask hissed. "Come down. Let's talk like men." "There are no men in this room, Silas," I shouted down, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Just a dying thief and his accomplices." "Careful, Julian." Elias stepped forward, his hand moving toward the small of his back. I saw the glint of a holster. "We have friends outside. You aren't leaving this house without doing what you came here for." "I came here for my sister," I said, stepping into the light at the top of the stairs. I held up the microSD card I'd taken from the watch. "And I came to show you what 7 years of freedom looks like." Silas's eyes narrowed. "That card, that's my life's work. My protection." "It's your obituary," I replied. "I've already set a timed upload. Every spreadsheet, every bribe, every dirty secret in this file goes to the Attorney General's office in 45 minutes. Unless I stop it." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Even Elias looked pale now. "You wouldn't," Clara whispered. "You destroy us all. Your own name." "I don't have your name anymore, Clara," I said. "I'm Leo Vance. And Leo Vance doesn't give a damn about the Thorne legacy." I started down the stairs, Maya right behind me. I kept my eyes on Silas. The lion looked small now. Pathetic. He was clutching the arms of his wheelchair, so hard the plastic was groaning. "Stop him, Elias." Silas barked, a spray of red appearing on his oxygen mask. "Get that card." Elias pulled his weapon. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't stop moving. "Go ahead, Elias," I said, my voice calm. "Shoot me. But remember, you can't transplant a kidney that's full of lead. If I die, Dad dies 10 minutes later. Is that the legacy you want to explain to the people outside?" Elias hesitated. The logic hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the gun, then at his dying father, then at me. For the first time in his life, the Golden Sun had no moves left. I reached the bottom of the stairs, standing inches from the barrel of the gun. I could smell the fear on them. "Move," I said. But as I reached for the front door handle, a heavy thud echoed from the porch. The security outside wasn't waiting anymore. The door burst open, and a man I didn't recognize, huge, scarred, and looking like he'd crawled out of a mercenary's fever dream, stepped inside. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, looking at Silas. "The perimeter is secure. But we have a problem. There are 3 black SUVs coming up the drive. And they aren't the police." Silas's face went from pale to ghostly. "The Italians," he whispered. The voicemails hadn't just been for me. The people Silas had betrayed were finally here to collect their own debt. And they weren't interested in kidneys. The room turned into a vacuum. The air was sucked out by the realization that my father hadn't just been running from the law, he'd been running from people who didn't believe in due process. The man at the door, the mercenary Silas had hired, reached for a sidearm, but he was too late. A rhythmic thud-thud-thud hit the heavy oak of the front door. Not knocking.
Gunfire.
Suppressed, clinical, and terrifyingly efficient. The glass in the transom shattered, raining diamonds down onto the foyer. "Get down." I tackled Maya to the floor, shielding her with my body behind the heavy mahogany dining table. Elias, usually the bravest man in the room when he had a belt in his hand, scrambled behind the grand piano, his gun shaking so hard I could hear it knocking against the wood. My mother, Clara, just stood there, paralyzed, a ghost in a silk robe, until the mercenary shoved her into the kitchen. "Silas," the mercenary yelled over his shoulder. "We can't hold the perimeter. They've got thermal. They know exactly where you are." My father didn't move. He sat in his wheelchair, the oxygen mask hissing like a cornered snake. He looked at the shattered glass, then at me. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a cold, calculating fury. He wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of losing the game. "The card, Julian," he wheezed, his voice cracking through the intercom of his mask. "Give them the card. It's the only thing they want. The accounts, the passwords, it's all there." I looked at the tiny microSD card in my hand. This was the inheritance of thorns. This was the reason 99 voicemails had chased me across the country. It wasn't about a kidney anymore. That was just the backup plan. The primary goal was to use me as a shield to hand over the blood money. "They aren't here for the money, Silas," I shouted back. "Look at the cars. Those aren't accountants." Outside, the world exploded. A flashbang detonated on the porch, white light bleeding through the cracks of the boarded-up windows. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out Maya's sobbing. I looked at the burner phone on the floor. My extraction team was still 20 minutes out. We were trapped in a dying empire, caught between a father who wanted my organs and a shadow syndicate that wanted his head. "Elias, do something!" Clara screamed from the kitchen. Elias peeked over the piano and fired 2 wild shots toward the door. The response was a hail of lead that chewed the instrument to splinters. "Julian," Maya whispered, her hand gripping my arm so hard her nails drew blood. "We have to go. The back way. The coal chute." "No," I said, looking at Silas. "He'll just follow us. As long as he's alive, we're the targets. He's the lighthouse, Maya. He's calling the storm right to us." I stood up, ignoring the glass crunching under my boots. I walked toward my father, the man who had spent 26 years trying to own my soul. I leaned down until I could see my own reflection in his oxygen mask. "You want to survive this?" I whispered. "Then you give me the one thing you've never given anyone. You give me the truth. Who is in those cars, Silas? Who did you really steal from?" Silas looked at me, his eyes unfocused. "Everyone," he rasped. "I stole from everyone." The front door didn't just open, it was kicked off its hinges. 3 men stepped through the ruins of the entryway. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. They were wearing tailored suits and the kind of expressions you only see on people who have forgotten how to feel. The leader was a man in his 60s, silver-haired and elegant, carrying a silenced submachine gun like it was an umbrella. He didn't look at the mercenary bleeding out by the coat rack. He didn't look at Elias whimpering behind the piano. He looked straight at Silas. "Silas," the man said. His voice was like velvet over sandpaper. "You've been a very difficult man to reach. Your voicemail was full." I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. 99 messages. The irony was the physical weight. Vincenzo, Silas wheezed. I have the data. My son, he has it right here. He pointed a shaking finger at me. The silver-haired man, Vincenzo, turned his gaze toward me. It was like being stared at by a shark. So this is the prodigal, Vincenzo said. He tilted his head. You don't look like a thorn. You look like a man who's been sleeping in a different world. I am, I said, stepping in front of Maya. And I don't care about his debts. Take the card. Take the house. Just let us walk. I held out the microSD card. My heart was a drum, but my hand was steady. This was the final transaction. I was buying my sister's life with the wreckage of my father's sins. Vincenzo walked forward, his shoes clicking on the hardwood. He took the card between two fingers, inspecting it like a rare coin. Then he did something I didn't expect. He dropped it on the floor and crushed it under his heel. The sound of the plastic snapping was the loudest thing in the room. Silas let out a strangled cry. We didn't come for the data, Silas, Vincenzo said, turning back to my father. We already have copies. We came for the principal. You thought you could retire. You thought you could hide behind a sickbed and a son you hadn't spoken to in 7 years. Vincenzo raised his weapon. Wait! Clara shrieked, running out of the kitchen. Take the boy. He's a match. You can sell the organs. Silas told us. He's worth millions on the black market. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had tucked me in, who had baked my birthday cakes, who had watched me grow. She wasn't looking at me with love. She was looking at me like a pile of cash. Even Vincenzo looked disgusted. He lowered his gun slightly, glancing at me with a twisted kind of pity. Your family, Vincenzo said, is a cancer, kid. Even by my standards. I know, I said. And then the siren started. Not the extraction team. Not the Italians. The real police. I had triggered the silent alarm the moment I stepped into the house. I didn't just want out. I wanted it all to burn. Everything happened at once. The sound of the sirens sent Vincenzo's men into a defensive crouch. They weren't looking to have a shootout with the state police. Not over a dying old man and a crushed microSD card. Check the back. Vincenzo barked. We leave.
Now.
As the gunman retreated toward the kitchen, Silas tried to move his wheelchair, his face purple with the effort of breathing. Don't leave me, he screamed. Elias. Get me to the car. But Elias was already gone. I saw his shadow dart out through the side terrace, leaving his father, his mother, and his sister behind without a second thought. The golden sun was the first rat off the sinking ship. Maya, the coal chute. I grabbed her hand. We ran toward the basement stairs, but Clara blocked our path. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wide and glassy. You can't leave. If you leave, they'll take me. They'll say I was part of it. Julian, please, I'm your mother. I stopped. I looked at the woman who had just offered to sell my body to a hitman 5 minutes ago. You aren't my mother, I said, my voice cold and flat. You're just a person I used to know. I pushed past her. We hit the basement just as the front doors were kicked in for the second time that night, this time by the SWAT team. The basement was a labyrinth of shadows. We reached the coal chute, a small, rusted metal square near the ceiling. I boosted Maya up first. She scrambled through the narrow opening, her breathing ragged. Julian, come on, she hissed from the other side. I grabbed the edge of the chute, pulling myself up when I felt a hand grab my ankle. It was Silas. He had fallen out of his wheelchair and dragged himself across the basement floor. He was gasping for air, his face smeared with coal dust. His grip was surprisingly strong, the desperate, dying strength of a man who refused to be left in the dark. Don't leave me,
he wheezed.
You owe me. I looked down at him. In the dim light of the basement, he didn't look like a king. He didn't look like a monster. He just looked like a pathetic, broken old man who had spent his whole life building a cage and was finally realizing he was the only one trapped inside it. I don't owe you anything, Silas, I said. Not even my hate. I kicked my leg free. I climbed through the chute and tumbled out into the wet grass. The rain was still falling, but for the first time in 7 years, it felt clean. Maya was waiting for me. We didn't look back at the house. We didn't look at the flashing lights or the men in tactical gear swarming the porch. We ran into the woods, toward the logging trail where my car was hidden. As we reached the tree line, I stopped and looked back at the Thorne estate. A single flame was licking at the curtains of the library. The 99 voicemails were finally silent. My phone was dead in my pocket. And as the house began to glow with the orange light of the fire, I realized that the boy named Julian was finally, truly, gone. But Leo Vance? Leo Vance was just getting started. The fire from the library began to roar, a hungry orange beast devouring the heavy oak shelves and the decades of secrets they held. The silhouette of the Thorne estate looked like a skeletal hand reaching for the sky. Behind me, the blue and red lights of the police cruisers pulsed against the wet pine trees, but I didn't stop. I kept Maya's hand gripped in mine, pulling her through the brush until the sounds of the sirens became a dull hum in the distance. We reached my car, parked deep in the shadows of the old logging trail. I threw the doors open, shoved Maya into the passenger seat, and climbed behind the wheel. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the sheer electricity of the escape. "Julian," Maya whispered, her voice cracking as she looked at the orange glow on the horizon. "It's gone. Everything. The house, them." "Good," I said, my voice like iron. "Let it burn." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was buzzing again. Call number 100. I looked at the screen. It was Elias. He must have made it to a burner or stolen a phone from the driveway. I hit accept and put it on speaker. "Julian, you bastard." Elias was screaming, his voice distorted by wind and panic. "I saw you leave. I saw you take her. The police are everywhere. They're taking Mom into custody. Dad didn't make it out of the basement. You killed him. You killed our father." I pulled onto the main road, the headlights cutting through the Oregon mist. He killed himself, Elias. He killed himself the moment he decided his children were just spare parts.
And as for you, you're on your own now.
No name to hide behind. No money to fix your messes. Just you and the truth. "I'll find you," Elias shrieked. "I'll tell the cops you were the one who—" "Tell them whatever you want," I interrupted. "I have 7 years of a paper trail that says I don't exist in your world. I have the medical records you tried to hide. I have the proof of the deal Silas made. If you ever come near me or Maya again, I won't call the police. I'll call the people Silas robbed. And I'll tell them exactly where the Golden Sun is hiding." The silence on the other end was absolute. For the first time in my life, I had the power. I wasn't the boy under the sink anymore. I was the architect of his own destiny. I hung up. We drove through the night, crossing back over the state line as the sun began to bleed over the mountains. The debt Silas claimed I owed wasn't a biological one. It wasn't about a kidney or a spreadsheet. The only real debt was the one I owed to myself, the debt of living a life that wasn't a lie. I looked at Maya. She was watching the sunrise, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She was free. We were both free. We didn't go back to Chicago. Leo Vance died that night, too. We went further west, to a small coastal town where the air smells like salt, and the only thing that matters is the tide. Maya is going back to school now. She wants to be a therapist to help people navigate the kind of darkness we spend our lives in. And me? I still design. I still drink black coffee. But I don't jump when the phone rings anymore. People often ask me how I could walk away from 99 voicemails. How I could leave my own family in a burning house. They talk about unconditional love and blood being thicker than water. But they don't understand that blood is just a liquid. It doesn't make a home. True family is built on respect, not ransoms. It's built on the choice to stay, not the fear of leaving. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're drowning in a sea of debts you never signed for, if you're being told that your life belongs to someone else just because you share a last name, listen to me. You're allowed to walk away. You are allowed to be the villain in their story if it means being the hero in yours. I checked my phone one last time before I tossed it into the Pacific Ocean. No missed calls. No new messages. Just the sound of the waves. I'm not Julian anymore. I'm not even really Leo. I'm just a man who chose himself. And for the first time in 33 years, the silence is beautiful. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.